interrupt it and have sort of a conversation. It's much more fun than just me talking. So I'll start there. And I suppose I'll start by asking you guys a question, which is, I kind of start in one of two areas. I can start on the entrepreneurial side, where I do a bunch of work in a field called effectuation, which is really all about entrepreneurial expertise. How do expert entrepreneurs make decisions in positions of high uncertainty? That's one where we can start. Or we can start in the other sort of field that I work in, which is angel investing and venture capital and venture finance type topics. So the question goes to the room. If you were to start somewhere, who would prefer to start with entrepreneurial expertise? And who would prefer to start with the angel investing stuff? Clear winner is the entrepreneurial expertise. All right. So, let's start. All right, good. We're cute. All right. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, the interesting reason I started studying this stuff was because I was curious how people make decisions when there's almost no basis for actually making decisions, right? When you think about what you learn in business school about setting goals and doing research about the future and all that sorts of stuff, in the entrepreneurial world, lots of that stuff doesn't exist yet. The markets don't often exist. The whole categories don't exist. And figuring out how to know what to do next without all that information is actually difficult. So the decision space that we're playing with is the goals are just not actually well known. Not only do we not know how to make certain things happen, we're not quite sure what we want to make happen. So we have aspirations, like we might want to go try to do something, but that aspiration isn't specific enough to tell you what to do next. Right? So you might say, I want to build a company in this category. Well, that's fine. There's probably 83 different ways to meet that aspiration, and so you don't really know what to do next based on the goal. That's a big problem. And then, by the way, that's in addition to just the challenge of we're not quite sure what to do, even if we did have a clear goal. So you have lots of uncertainty on both sides of that. Then you just have the simple fact is the future is massively unpredictable. Right? We all think we can predict it, but in fact we can't. And the examples abound of like horribly embarrassing predictions that the world has made years and years over. One of my favorites because I was at Tektronix when we sold our printer business to Xerox. When Xerox first started, they invested 10 years worth of earnings to start the company. And the first market research that they did thought that the lifetime market for photocopy machines was between 5,000 and 10,000 units. Lifetime. Okay. And there's just so many examples of that it's entertainment to play with those things. And my PhD is in a field called non-predictive strategy. Last one, super hard problem, especially for engineers. People do not do what you tell them to do. Right? You would like them to do the rational, intelligent thing and follow the instructions, etc., 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 and yet they never do, ever. And so you say, look, this is a very clear value proposition, should totally work. We're going to go to these people, and for these very intelligent reasons, they're going to do business with us. You go and you explain it to them, and they nod, and they agree with everything you say, and they might even agree that your solution is in fact the better and correct answer. And you say, would you like to buy? Nah. Why not? Well, I got it in a spreadsheet, and that works good enough. And so just raw apathy and just raw human disinterest takes over a vast majority of the time. Even when you have a genuinely good thing, people suck. It's a very hard part about entrepreneurship. So within this space, what becomes interesting is how in the world can you make an intelligent decision about what to do next? It's actually really hard when you think about that problem. So friends of mine, Sarah Sarasvathy, who's at Darden at the University of Virginia, Nick Dew, who's at the Naval Postgraduate School, and Stuart Reed, who was at IMD in Switzerland, who just recently left. The four of us did work. Sarah was just a fresh PhD, and the other three of us were doing our PhDs together with a bunch of expert entrepreneurs. So we've been studying expert entrepreneurs for almost 15 years now, basically asking them, how do you decide what to do next in various forms in that context? So we came up with what we think is just sort of these two broad stroke of patterns. One is causation. Causation is a very distinguished, sort of very traditional view of predictive logic. You decide what to do next by setting a goal, determining what resources will help you reach that goal, determining which of those resources you already have access and control to, and then which ones you need to go get, and then creating a plan for going and getting the things that you need, and then executing to reach your goal. It's perfectly great ways to make decisions. But in the setting of entrepreneurship, that's actually hard to do for all the reasons discussed. when we talk to expert entrepreneurs, we did a bunch of different studies, verbal protocol analysis, a bunch of survey work, a bunch of different experimental designs. What's interesting is how consistently they don't do that. They start from the other end. They basically say, here are our means. I wonder what we could do with these. And so if you say, how are you going to decide to do what to do next? They don't do any work on goals per se. They just simply say, well, what could we do? And so if the four of us are hanging out, we could do something together. But if I was hanging out with three other people and the four of us were hanging out, I might do something entirely different just based on who I'm around. So this difference between what can we do versus what should we do is a big part of how expert entrepreneurs just start from a very different starting point. The interesting challenge or the interesting effect of that is that entrepreneurs always come up with novel things. If you notice in your business school education, a lot of the stuff students come up with, they're not always terribly novel because we're anchored a lot in the goal setting process, etc. Expert entrepreneurs always come up with novelty because it starts from their means, which are rather path dependent and random. Now we don't know if that's going to be valuable. We don't know if it will grow, but we always know that it's going to be rather novel, which is an interesting advantage when you think about it from a strategy standpoint. I'm going to skip this one. So, I want to go through sort of the decision-making principles of effectuation. And this would be, interesting thing also. Hey, interesting thing is, nobody's all effectual or all causal. Everybody does some of both of these things. Expert entrepreneurs do dramatically more effectuation than causation, but they don't do zero. And novices do sort of a random messiness of nothingness. We'd like to have less novices in the world on this stuff. So we're going to go through these. Causal is red, effectuation is blue. So when you're just about to start, where do you start? You determine your goals, you look at the predictions ability to get goals, and that's where you go. We talked about means. These are the means that matter. It's not what you own. It's whom do you know, what do you know, and I forgot the third one. Expertise. Oh, and your identity, right? What turns you on, right? Because in fact, all the things that start up oftentimes are nonprofits. So you have to have various reasons that really motivate you to get involved in this stuff. Because frankly, if you don't do it, it doesn't ever get done, right? The economist's assumption that, well, entrepreneurs just kind of happen. Assume entrepreneurs, right? Well, that's you. And if you're going to go do it, then you have to do the work to do it. It's a problem. So, the reason we don't care about what you own is because with these three things, you can just go get other stuff, right? It's more about what the network of people have at their disposal. And every time you get new stuff, you own new stuff, or new folks. So, then once you say, we're started, we're in, we're going to go do this thing, the next question becomes, well, how do I know how much money I need? How do I know what to put into it? How do I know when to spend that money? The causal way basically looks at the predicted trend of your business and says, here's your plan. You should invest in this. This would be the capital required to reach your goal on your plan. Perfectly good. Financial principles, etc. Expected return is the basic way to do it. Expert entrepreneurs do almost zero of that. They ask an entirely different question. They simply say, well, I have no idea how big the market is, but I have $27,000 in 9 months. And if I could get this done in $27,000 in 9 months, this would be a heck of a business. But if I don't, it's not the end of the world. So the end of the world question is much more interesting than the expected return question to expert entrepreneurs. And when you look at, we have a whole paper written on just the distinction between these two things. When you look at how people make the plunge decision of getting into starting a company, affordable loss leads you to make that decision in ways that expected return almost always stops you. The interesting thing about expected return, the discounted cash flow model, etc., even when we do deals together, people will sometimes look at discounted cash flows and the discount rate, and normally in public companies, etc., 10%, 15, maybe 20 as a hurdle rate against WACC, right? In the entrepreneurial world, people will sometimes discount it like by 80% or 70%, and that feels almost immoral. But the actual empirical level that you probably should discount is like 300%, 5,000%. And you just can't really honestly do a discount rate of that. It's almost unjustifiable from any financial perspective. So it's almost a misuse of those tools. So, means affordable loss. So, how do you interact with other people? Do you have NDAs? Do you think about competitive strategy and competitive positioning, etc.? That's the way causal people approach it, because everybody might compete with you in the future. So you need to be very mindful of how you were going to box them out and control this opportunity. Ironically, expert entrepreneurs couldn't care less about that stuff. Dramatically more interested in talking with everybody all the time and getting as many collaborators as possible. And they almost view it as a fishing expedition. Who can I talk into committing resources into this with me? How can I get them to take some of the risk away from my position in this deal? There's very little concern about the competitive strategy in this deal. In part because they don't even know who's their competitor yet. The person that you think is your competitor might end up being like your greatest supplier, or perhaps your best customer. So they just don't think about that, and they're really in pursuit of what we call pre-commitments. Pre-commitments are, well, I call them early yeses as well. Let's actually go back to the slide. Oops, wrong direction. Right there. So imagine that you've started at your means, and you've created 5 options, potential goals that you like. And so you start fishing on them. You start talking to people about them. You start exploring them. And maybe 3 of them appear to have some interest, right? People are actually intrigued by them. Well, how do you know which one to do? How would you decide? Actual question. How about you decide between the 3 that kind of look promising? You've talked to some people, yeah, I kind of like that one. And then some other people said these 2. So let's say options 1, 2, and 3 appear to have legs. Options 4 and 5, people said, don't bother. That's going to be harder than you think. Not very feasible. But 1, 2, and 3, those I promise. Go forth and prosper. Okay, how are you going to choose between 1, 2, and 3? Well, like, just think, forget about that stuff. How do you think you would decide?
The one that interested me the most.
Okay, so who I am. Which one resonates with me and my identity? Fair enough.
Sell them.
Go sell them, and to what end?
Figure out which one the market wants.
Yeah, so pre-commitments is all about this idea. So I would say, go try to sell. Literally get a check. And the one you should pursue is the one that somebody bought. So, which do I want to do, 1, 2, and 3? Well, it's the confluence of my means, my affordable loss, and the one somebody bought. And I tend to have a strong preference for the pre-commitments, the early yeses. That's the hardest part, right? Persuading somebody else to come in.
But in that, don't you have to be careful on who you're asking and who you're getting those pre-commitments from? Because if your space with which you go and ask that question is predefined by some of your biases, your network, your other knowledge, it may lead you to not the best solution. But maybe it's the best for...
So what's the best solution? I would suggest that in this context, best is a very, very difficult idea. So, I thought where you were starting was sort of this notion of competition, perhaps. But optimization is another very problematic situation in this context, right? In this context at the start, this one here, optimization is a massive problem. You can optimize the science part of it, perhaps, right? This machine is optimized. But the machine, the product, is usually one very small piece of the venture you're trying to pursue. So the idea of best partner, best solution, optimized model, these are tempting distractions from what is ultimately going to be a very difficult, sloppy, messy thing that you build. And so, in general, I find concerns over optimizing stuff slow everything down. I've heard somebody one time say, if you're not embarrassed by the first thing you sell, you waited way too long to sell it. You should just be embarrassed by the first stuff, in hindsight, right? At the time, you're kind of proud of it, but then you look back a few years later and go, oh, I can't believe somebody bought that thing. So, I'm not sure if that deals with your question.
I wasn't talking optimization. I'm saying you potentially are filtering your inputs and be aware of who you're getting that data from, right?
I don't, it's not data, it's a check.
Right.
So there's a big difference there, right? So I'm definitely not encouraging you to go do market research and get data of any kind. What I'm trying to say is, go find somebody who you think will be moved by what you're doing and get them to commit resources to you. I don't want information from them. I want money, I want talent, whatever that is. So a pre-commitment is a lot different than sort of perspective, if that makes sense. Because what I'm actually trying to do is create the market with them. So I may not know how big the market is, but if the 2 of us just did a deal together, there's a market. It's the 2 of us. It's here. There's no prediction in that whatsoever. We just created that market. So if I can then go find out other ways forward, all of a sudden now, I don't have any idea how big it's going to be, but I know it's at least the 2 of us big, because you just gave me something in exchange for what I gave you. And that's how expert entrepreneurs think about the early steps of what they're doing. So those early yeses, that pre-commitment is a big deal. So when things pop up, so surprises. So you get in here, you start working down one path, and inevitably you go, oops, I totally learned something that I had no concept of. And it seems like Murphy's Law always applies, and it's always bad surprises. But sometimes they're good surprises. In most causal models, when you're going off of a goal approach, the idea is to weather the storm, right? Stay on plan, stay on target, persist, be strong. Which, sure, that's great. But expert entrepreneurs are looking to actually take advantage of the surprise. And here's why. It's the one thing that you now know that nobody else knows. Because in order to learn that surprise, you actually had to stick your face into the problem. You can't learn it from a distance. That's why you were surprised by it. So you only learn it by kind of dipping in there and really getting close to the problem. And that's oftentimes where your best ideas end up coming from, is being that close to the solution that has to get taken forth. So if you get on plan and you start working down your goal, if you just weather the surprises, you're kind of missing that opportunity to take advantage of the key insights that come up as you go. There's a great book on this topic, sort of, called Getting to Plan B. Many of you, I'm sure, have read it. It's written by a couple of guys around Kleiner Perkins, who had a CEO meeting. You know, you can imagine a room like this with all the CEOs of the companies that the Kleiner is back, which is a large set of companies, very highly talented people. And they asked a simple question: how many of you are running the company that we invested in? 2 hands went up. Every other company in the place was running basically a different business than what Kleiner had done all their diligence work on, all their analysis, and said, we're going to back that. Only 2 CEOs' hands went up. So the book is all about, how did they choose which way to turn? What caused that turn, etc.? Leveraging surprise is how that happens. They were going this way, and a customer said, hey, we kind of like that, but we have this other problem over here. I'd never give you money for that, but I'd give you a lot of money for this. Well, expert entrepreneurs listen to that feedback, especially poor ones, right? The ones that are on affordable loss go, yeah, I'll do that. The ones who have lots of venture capital backing them oftentimes are more there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you sort of answered it. But I was thinking about the distinction between the entrepreneur, I don't know if you call them entrepreneurs, they don't go out to market. But anyway, the entrepreneur that goes out to market and sells something, the surprises come from the market, and they're driven from those surprises versus an entrepreneur that stays in-house and gets surprised by his own research, and it's not driven by market. I mean, you distinguish those.
That's a good question.
Success.
I'd say all surprises you should pay attention to, but I would be careful on committing resources to surprises that don't come from the market. But I think all surprises should be taken seriously, right? Anything that you had to work hard to be surprised by, that's like cherished. Those are special moments, right? Those are hard things to get. Frankly, even being surprised by research is hard, right? Most research is kind of like, yeah, kind of whatever. But every now and then you're like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, you should leverage all of that stuff. And obviously it can make you have this, perhaps you're going to be too willy-nilly. But if you use the other principles, affordable loss, pre-commitments, etc., now you have this sort of framework within which a sort of complete decision can be made.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any data on the successful investments where the entrepreneur said in the pitch,
Yeah.
this may go a completely different direction. I may have a plan B that nobody,
Yeah, never.
Right.
So here's an interesting thing so this is actually one difference between venture capitalists and angel investors, but I think to your point. So if you were to go to Bridger and say, hey, here's our idea, but oh, by the way, in case this idea sucks, we have this backup option and this backup option. Most investors do not want to hear this. What they want to hear this is the most amazing idea ever. All of the surprises that are going to happen have already happened, don't worry. And we've got it nailed. That's what investors, naive investors, definitely want to hear, right? They don't want to hear the anxiety and the struggle of this. Angel investors have more openness to this, right? Most angel investors are cashed-out entrepreneurs, and they know that the other stuff is mostly positioning. And so they hear it and all that, but they're a little bit more open to the flexibility of it. A lot of VCs get on the board, they put in $5 million, they take control of a lot of parts of the company, and when the entrepreneur says, hey, I see that we're gaining on our goals, but this thing came up over here. And I want to switch and I want to use all that money for an entirely different kind of thing. Most VCs don't want to hear that, and they won't even back it. And oftentimes they'll fire that CEO. And then that CEO goes and starts a different company, and that different company attacks that surprise, and plenty of successes have happened in that regard. In fact, I'm about to do a deal in Portland. It's exactly that scenario. Guy was on track, making his thing, raised $12 million from, not even a VC, $12 million from a private equity group with their head where, that's recording. And then they threw this person out, and this person made this move, and it would be a good story, except for I'm not going to say that. So, your point's valid. You do have to have an artificial level of confidence and stability in order to close deals, which is why the fact that Kleiner wrote Getting to Plan B was interesting, right? That's a deep realization for that.
Yeah, I'm thinking back about all the pitches that we got at Motley Capital, and as soon as the entrepreneur left the room, if there was like this wavering and no set focus, it was
It's
not
true.
gonna happen.
That's a really good point. You know, I always look at angel investment, we'll talk about it a little bit, but as this really interesting place where you have to be almost recklessly confident to say no to all kinds of very interesting things, but also have a certain level of humility that you might be utterly wrong every time you make that decision. And it just kind of is a very frustrating thing to hold on to. Most people end up going down the I know everything route and missing on some really interesting opportunities for this kind of reason. You know? So the underlying logic of what entrepreneurs are trying to do is they're trying to create the future, not predict it. So we had an entrepreneur say to us, why would I try to control a future you can't predict when I can create a future that you can't control? I just create it. And if you say to an entrepreneur, you know, the predictions for the market you're going into are really bad. Several entrepreneurs with straight face have said to me, well, your predictions don't include me. Right now, I'm just getting started. Give me a chance. And the crazy thing is, that's true often enough that you can't ignore it. It's definitely hard to do. Most entrepreneurs don't do it. They fail. But if you look at the ones that win, boy, they came pretty darn close to making that statement actually totally credible, right? That's a very interesting, different way of thinking about what you're doing as an entrepreneur. If your objective is to predict the future, position appropriately, and then capitalize on it, that's one way to go about it. But if your objective is to actually go and directly build an element of some market somewhere, boy, that's a different kind of exercise. Expert entrepreneurs more often do the latter, in short. So there you go. Questions, thoughts, comments? For those of you academics in the room, we could go down an entirely academic route on how we think about this stuff, which would be a fun conversation for us. I'm not sure anybody else would find it terribly useful, but it is a fun topic. There was a hand there, I thought. Yes?
I was going to say, I'm Liz Markey, and I have an angel fund here in Montana, but I think one of the big differences, too, with angel investors is that we work with a lot of non-expert entrepreneurs.
Yep.
That's
It's a great point. And part of what angel investors, how do I say this? Okay, I'm biased on this, so take this with a grain of salt. Angel investors are overwhelmingly cashed out entrepreneurs. Part of what builds regions and builds entrepreneurial ecosystems is the cashed out entrepreneurs who've developed expertise. When they make the mistake of retiring too young and get bored, they take all that cash and their expertise and they turn around and they look for entrepreneurs who they think kind of actually get it, and they invest in some of them, and then it happens again, and now there's 3 of them, and then they turn around to do it, and it happens again, and now there's 9 of them, right? That's how these ecosystems build over time. That's why the Bay Area is dramatically ahead of everybody else, is because they started doing this in the 50s, and everybody else didn't. Boston's slightly behind them because they also started doing it in the 50s, and it's a smaller area, but same idea. Portland is sort of working up one sort of evolutionary cycle at a time. Seattle's doing the same thing. Everybody's on that path, right? Because that's the way that it works. So in Montana, you're working down the same path. It's just you have to think about your cycle time between those things. And, you know, what the entrepreneurs do when they're done. So angel investors have a great opportunity to educate and help the entrepreneurs coming along after them to understand that, you know, you don't need to come to us like we're a bank. We can be more entrepreneurial together. There's a way to approach that sort of thing. I'm going to close close this because it's probably cold enough now. I propped that open because you always get hotter standing up in the front. So that's just a summary of it. These slides, by the way, are all on my website at Willamette. So if you just Google my name, it should pop up. So when I'm working with entrepreneurs, essentially I'm trying to find entrepreneurs that are doing more blue than red. Now, venture capitalists aren't looking for that, generally speaking. So you have to know this. And sometimes, when you're in a different country, you speak a different language. And so even if you're effectual, you speak causally, because that's kind of what they want to hear, right? Total available market size, competitive strategy, marketing plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Stuff that we learn in business school. So to a certain extent, you're learning a language in business school, which is this language of, how do people work when they have clear goals and, executing on plan? Which, by the way, most large organizations are doing that, since those are perfectly valuable, viable skills. Not everything stays in the blue. We just believe that blue is where things start. So if you look down like the Fortune 500 list, if you were to actually go back and do a historical study on where they came from, blue, the vast majority of time they started blue. To varying degrees. But that would be a really awesome PhD if anybody wants to do a PhD. Ooh. Like a PhD in history built around entrepreneurship. To get past the hero stories of entrepreneurship into the real stories of entrepreneurship, I would like forever be your PhD fan groupie. So, that's entrepreneurial expertise. This is the model that we work on.
I'm just wondering about how you peel off risk without stifling creativity. I mean, it just seems like there's this really tricky balance.
Peeling off risk without stifling creativity. What do you mean? Tell me more.
Well, I see your blue. Seems like it could be a little more risky. The red was more conservative, but entrepreneurs seem the entrepreneurs you're describing. There's a lot of creative process and such. And I see. To me, it sounds like some of that is like could stifle creativity if you bring in
Interesting.
risk preventing.
I think that red leads to bigger dollar risk because you're making bigger predictions on the future and betting on them. But I think that blue leads to more risk of failure because if you don't get the pre-commitments or you run out of resources, you're done. So I think that there's risk in both buckets. It's a different kind of risk. But I also subscribe to the idea that the absence of resources and the requirement of collaboration are interesting constraints on innovation. And that I would suggest that they may well enhance it. The presence of money is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to innovation. A little bit of money, sure, you gotta be able to buy the screw that you thought you needed, sure. But lots of money is a problem. Ask yourself this question: if you're selling a product that's red, and a customer says, if that were blue, I'd buy 10 million of them. Well, who's more likely to say yes? The person who's sitting on $10 million of invested venture capital money, or the entrepreneur that has $5 in the bank? The latter person is instantaneously going to say yes, instantly. But corporations struggle from this problem all the time. Their startups, have $20 million just sitting around in an account budget. And so you have all kinds of people inside corporations that started up. A customer says, we like what you did, but we're not going to buy that. We buy this. And they regularly say, well, our charter is to do this. And we still have this much budget, so we're not going to switch. Opportunity lost. Corporations, I think corporate entrepreneurship struggles inherently from that problem. They overfund everything. Because they kind of believe that if you don't bet big, you're just being wimpy. You're not going for it. And if you don't bet big, you can't win big. But that is empirically untrue. But everybody has this kind of implicit idea that in order to hit a home run, you have to swing really hard. Probably like golf. If you want to drive the ball really far, swing hard, bad idea. Right? Hit the sweet spot, good idea. So this is the deal. So when I'm working with entrepreneurs, here in fact, I'll come back to some of these stories. Oh, maybe not. There we go. It always does this. How do we mute this thing? Okay, that sucks. A friend of mine built this whole big thing. Has anybody ever heard of the Ice Hotel? The Ice Hotel is this really great story of these guys that basically every year build a new hotel out of ice. And this company came from, let's see, this right here. This company came from a guy who was a chemical engineer who hated his job. And every morning he would go kayaking. And so ultimately he started a river rafting company. And then he's like, what do I gotta do next? He could start, he didn't like leaving in the winter, but obviously you can't river raft in the Arctic Circle in the winter. So he was starting kind of exploring ideas, and they had an ice sculpture competition, because a friend of his that he met in Japan somehow through the tourist office said, hey, let's do an ice sculpture competition. It rained on it. It was the first time it had ever rained there in like 30 or 40 years during the winter. It melted everything. Everybody was like really, really disappointed except for England. And he's like, that was kind of awesome. And he was really turned on by this idea that things come and things go, and that's just part of the cycle of nature. It's sort of who he is. So the following year, when they came out, instead of doing ice sculptures, they built a hotel. And they all slept in it. Didn't charge any money, that's just where they slept. And the following year they built it again, charged money for it. A couple years go by, hotel. And now they charge, kid you not, $300, $400 a night. It's booked out like 9 months in advance, etc. And here's the other crazy thing. In order to grow it, they wanted to get a marketing partner. And they sell a lot of alcohol there, because what else are you going to do? And I have no idea. And so they wanted to get Absolute Vodka as a partner. So, clear goal, Absolute Vodka. They call. How else are you going to get him as a partner? You call, you try to get warm referrals, normal stuff. How many calls back? None. So, the following year, you know what they do? They carve the Absolute Vodka logo shape into all the doorways, all the bar, everywhere they could think to put it. And National Geographic happened to do a photo spread. The very next day, the VP of Global Marketing for Absolute calls up and says, are we involved in this? And Ingrid says, yes, you are now, right? But from an affordable law standpoint, if Absolute Vodka said that's a horrible idea to cease and desist, they would have just got a blowtorch, melted the ice, and that was that. No harm, no foul, right? So you just pure affordable loss off this surprising thing from the photograph. Guess how he makes almost all his money now? Selling ice cube cups to ice bars around the world. He exports cups made out of ice from the river where the original ice hotel was made. And he exports them all over the world to these bars that Absolute has opened up in warehouses that they refrigerate. And he sells the cups to the bars. That's like his #1 revenue generator. Now, imagine a marketing research project that could lead you to that business. Right? Not possible. Not possible. So, this is the process that we're always working on. So when I meet an entrepreneur, I'm always looking for, how does this opportunity connect to you? Not, is it good or bad generically, but is it good for you, right? There's much more personal basis. And if it's good for you, then the next thing I'm looking for is, are there steps that we can take for almost no money, right? Total affordable loss. Can we gain any ground on this without having to go raise $1 million from somebody? If the answer is no, that's hard. It's hard to raise $1 million just to try something out, right? Nobody wants to be first. I don't know. Would Bridger take it on in pre-revenue? Barely new idea for $1 million? John,
Yeah.
Maybe. Call. Call us. And then, of course, the commitments and follow is a big one for me. So, who have you tried to sell this to? Did they say yes? And what exactly did they say yes to? Sometimes people say yes to something that they should say yes to. Other times people say yes to something that they probably shouldn't say yes to. I'm looking for the latter, right? I'm going to send you 2 engineers for a month and we're going to work on this together. That's promising, right? So if you're working on something here in Bozeman and AMD or Intel says, yeah, I want to work on that with you. That's a good yes. I'm going to send you some people over. If they say, that's interesting. When you guys are done, give us a call. Maybe we'll do something together. Not a yes. Later is a no. Period. Entrepreneurs don't hear no's very well, right? And in the investment world, we always have this issue where we say, look, thanks for bringing this to us. Awesome. We're interested. But until you hit this and this, we can't really move forward. Entrepreneurs hear that is, awesome. They're interested. And maybe we're going to do something together. And what we said is, we're not currently interested, we might be in the future. But entrepreneurs don't hear that very well, and so they get very, very excited, and then they get kind of mad because they feel like we led them on sometimes. It's like, that's pretty explicit. I can't do anything now, and until these 2 things are done, I can't do anything yet. But entrepreneurs have a hard time now. And then taking advantage of surprise. So like this one slide, I'll sit down with entrepreneurs all the time, just walk down it, and off you go. And it loops, of course. An interesting thing about entrepreneurs is, if you, in fact, you can glue that on, I wish we would do this. you have a product and you successfully sell it to, say, Walmart. On the one hand, you now have a company. Awesome. We are selling X to Walmart. Let's go sell lots of it to Walmart. Fine. Lots of expert entrepreneurs will sit and go, hey, cool. I now know Walmart. I now know the Walmart buyers. I wonder what else I can do with my resources at this point. And now, sure, I'll keep selling you the product that we started with, but it's only a matter of time until I'm trying to sell 83 different things through that resource, right? And all of a sudden, off we go. We have a company that hasn't done the loop, in my opinion. We'll skip that. Okay, cool. Other questions, and I'm going to switch some slides here. Which one should we do? Well, all right, we'll do a little more entrepreneurial stuff. This one's easy. Okay, other questions on stuff? No, just sort of pause a moment. Otherwise, I'll just accidentally fill all the space.
This may be better just later on,
Okay.
but as an educator here in college, how do you go about teaching your students to think this way? Because as you said, most of what we do is very much the causal.
Absolutely. So the way that we do it at Willamette, it's me and my colleague Wade Brooks. Wade has a first-year elective, and we have just an MBA program here, so they're all MBA students. We have a first-year elective called Entrepreneurial Thinking, where our textbook is the text. We go through helping them understand the difference between what we're doing and the rest of their education, and why the timing and the sort of the setting matters. So if you're at Coca-Cola, well, you can predict how much Coke is going to be sold next Friday, to a can. And you can probably do that out maybe 4 or 5 years even, to be honest, to a very high level of accuracy. You would be remiss to do effectuation. It'd be a horrible approach, right? Use it. Use everything you learned in business school. But in an entrepreneurial setting, here are these other skills. So we try to teach it as a different tool set. And the way we reinforce that is we force them to get out of the classroom and go talk to entrepreneurs. Because when you actually talk to entrepreneurs and you ask them questions like, well, how did you do this? How did you do that? And they never tell you the textbook answer of we did this marketing thing and then we did this. They never, ever say that. They start to grasp it. Then the second year, all we do is start companies. And what you realize when you start companies is there's no other way to do it. You go, hey, let's go do some market research. And then go, yeah, let's go do some market research. Son, what am I going to go research? I don't even know what to ask anybody. And so they instantly feel the pain that there isn't the other method available. And then they begin to really internalize, wow, hey, if I don't go get a pre-commitment, there isn't a market. I can't even go do any research because there's nobody who even knows what I'm talking about yet. And so this is sort of that learning by doing is a big part of what we do. And then we also have an angel investment fund that we're doing deals in where we're essentially trying to invest in effectual entrepreneurs. So a lot of learning by doing. Yes?
What's the average size of your deal investment?
The ones that we do?
Yeah.
We do only 50K investments. Because it's very easy to get really excited and throw all your money into one company, which is a horrible approach. So we try to pace ourselves. Because the second year MBA students, especially early in the year, they like a lot of deals, right? Oh, this is the greatest company. They're going to change the world. And every week we see a new company that's about to change the world. It's like, maybe not, maybe not. Let's try to contain ourselves a little bit. And then by the end of the year, the opposite problem is there. They come back from a meeting and looking at deals and they all sucked. It's like somewhere in the middle is probably a reasonable place to be. So it takes about a year to do that. So 50K is our deal size. And we almost always co-invest alongside other angel investors. So the round size is much more normal, 500, maybe $1 million. And we're just a piece of a round. Yes, please.
So would you say that writing a business plan is a waste of time, or would you say it leads to a success or
The answer I'm going to give to that at a university is that for a work product for an entrepreneurship class, as a way to demonstrate your understanding of business design and business models and all this stuff, the business plan is a wonderful pedagogical tool. And it's a great output that can be graded, and there's lots of reasons universities find business plans valuable. And I don't dispute them at all. I think pedagogically the business plans is rather useful. I don't teach business plans. I haven't read a business plan in 10 years, and I've done a lot of deals in 10 years. do a lot of business design stuff. We do a lot of like the same kind of stuff minus the research part. So pragmatically, I don't find business plans to be useful. Pedagogically, I find it useful. So that's my answer to that question. There's not a lot of research that shows any particular benefit one way or the other from business plans. Slide decks. Building a slide deck is a good way to go, right? So maybe instead of doing a full business plan, do a nice, like, try to get to a good, clean pitch of some sort. I don't know. But I don't teach them. And when I came to Willamette, they wanted me to teach them, and I refused to teach them. Because I hate them and I don't have to read them. I was like, I'm not going to contribute to that problem. So, what makes a great opportunity? This is sort of just 2 quick slides on 6 things that I use a very quick screen for. Is this a good opportunity or not? And it comes from a Shel Silverstein poem called The Bendable, Foldable, Lovable, Huggable Man. And the 6 things are feasible, reachable, valuable, scalable, durable, saleable. And they're in order of requirement. So if you don't have the first one, the rest don't matter, and down the list. So the first 3 are must. Feasible, can it actually be done by you? Right? Not can it be done by the laws of physics, but can it be done by you? That personal connection again, feasibility. Followed by reachability. There's lots of things that can be done, but when you go to try to sell them, it's impossible to tell the market that you exist. There's nobody listening, and the cost of acquiring customers is just too high. So reachability is all about getting to the market. And then the third one is it actually valuable? Once you tell somebody what you can do, are they compelled to buy it? And at the price they're willing to pay for it, do you make any money off of it? So it has to be valuable for both parties. If these 3 things hold, you have a business. Awesome. A great entrepreneur business. You can provide for your family and your friends, and life can be very good. That business is not necessarily investable. Doesn't mean you shouldn't start it, right? Lots of businesses are this and no more. The second set, scalable, durable, saleable, you have to become interesting to investors. So, can you do it times 1,000,000? Doing something once a day, blah, 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 boring. To an investor, right? To an entrepreneur, that might be great. Now, as an entrepreneur, you also would prefer the other 3, scalable, durable, and saleable, because you'll just make a bigger, better business. And then you can sell it to somebody and make lots of money. And then start over again. So, scalable is all about the ability to do it at volume and grow the business. Durable is all about competition. So, a bummer thing about life is when you show the world a new way to make money, lots of other people will come and try to do your way of making money and compete with you for it. So you have to be prepared to think about that ultimately. And the last one is just about, is there a liquidity event? Are there companies that buy other companies like this at what kind of valuations and so forth? So this set of factors is just really a design problem, right? So you could score yourself out of 10 on these 6 things and say, okay, I'm pretty good here. Boy, I'm really weak here. Okay, let's go try to invent something here. So when we talk about innovation, you usually have to innovate some stuff here across all 6 of these categories. This is sort of, for me, a business model design exercise is to deal with these problems. Just some things from the School of Hard Knocks that John and I have learned together. It might be feasible, but it's actually just a product, not a company. Big problem. So it's like, great, you made a product. That's not actually a business. Startup capital is also an issue. So restaurants sound great, but you get to put basically $750,000 in the wind and then hope people eat at your restaurant after you've spent all the money. That's a huge challenge, right? That's an affordable loss problem. Reachable, all about apathy and fragmentation. Those 2 things make the cost of customer acquisition skyrocket. And you don't really know if people are going to be apathetic until you try to sell it to them, right? Because on paper, they shouldn't be apathetic. But remember, people don't do what you tell them to do. So you have to go try to convince them of stuff, and then you find out, oh, everybody is bored by this idea.
So, question, what do you mean by fragmentation?
Fragmentation is the idea that there's no big buyers. Everybody's a one-off, $9.99 at a time. And so I have to find 1 billion people at $9.99 to make the business worth it. So if instead you have maybe aggregated buying networks or bigger groups that make bigger deals per yes, dollars per yes is a big part of fragmentation. The more dollars you get per yes, the easier it will be for that business. Valuable. The only one here that matters is leading with price. Don't do it. It's a bad way into a market. Now, leading with cost, let's talk. Leading with price is just a bad starting strategy. Don't do it. It almost always dies. Because it's very easy to match. Dollars per time, there's only 24 hours in a day. The legal industry is a classic example of a babysitting business, and you can only sell so many hours as a babysitter. They just are very expensive babysitters. Advantages to scale. When you start a business and you think about whether it will scale up, the question that I always obsess over is, do the customers benefit from us being big? Not do I benefit from us being big. Of course I benefit from us being big. Do my customers benefit from us being big? You should be skeptical about the answer to that question. But if the answer is genuinely yes, then you might be onto something rather interesting. But oftentimes that's just not really true. And it might only be true in the sense of, well, if we're bigger, we could buy things at a lower cost and sell it. Maybe. You gotta look into that assumption. Especially, sourced in China.
Give an example of where it does benefit us to be bigger.
All network effects, right? So companies that are connected to the idea that the more people using my thing directly benefits everybody else. So Facebook is a classic example of a network effect. The more people on Facebook, the more valuable I find Facebook. The more people in LinkedIn, the more I value LinkedIn. So network effects always fall in this category. Network effects have their own challenges of determining whether there's an actual network effect or not, but those are two examples they are. So those always come into that. Another big one is things that are very technically challenging, where the expertise is hard won. By me getting bigger, I can now deploy that expertise to you in a way that a small organization wouldn't have ever learned to do. So you could argue that aircraft manufacturing, some of those large things benefit because, a small airplane manufacturing company doesn't learn as much as a big one, potentially, as an example. Yes?
Talk about your sense of scalable.
Speed.
Because I think that's a big difference, though, I think, between angels and other investors, is our aspiration for scale may be less than yours has to be in terms of exit.
Oh, well, no doubt that the more money you put into a deal, the more it has to get acquired for. And the more that it has to get acquired for, the bigger it needs to be, as a general rule. So when you look at investors like Malt Lake and some of the John and I have done together, where the round is $5 and $10 million, if that company doesn't get acquired for $50, $60, $100 million, everyone's kind of disappointed. In the angel investing world, if the total capital raised by a company is $1 million or $2 million, and the company gets bought for $20 million, nice, 10x, I'll take that all day long. So the capital intensity of a problem has a lot to do with the willing exit size. So VCs care a lot about scalability because they're coming into these things with huge amounts of money. And literally, if it doesn't get bought for $100 million, they're just not terribly excited about it. So that scalable problem is why they worry about total available market and some of the kind of research things that they do. But the problem of scale is the same. But just remember, it's not binary. Something isn't scalable or not. Some things are scalable to different degrees. So while I will mock law firms as not terribly scalable, if you hire 1,000 lawyers, you're still going to grow that business, right? It's not that it's zero scalable, it's just not a 10 on a scale of 10. Durable, the biggest thing to remember on the durability one is fads, fads, and fads. Things come, things go, and I don't know why they come and go, they just do. They shouldn't, but remember, people don't do what we tell them to do. So fads are a big issue. And then in addition to that, is this issue that relationships are fundamentally the most durable thing. So as you're growing your business, you have to think about what relationships are you building that actually solve some of these problems. And then the last one, just looking at who buys what in these categories, and more importantly, why do they buy them? Are they buying them for technology innovation? Are they buying them for the relationships? Are they buying them for the team? I don't know. But you got to figure out why they bought it, because that will then help you understand what you need to build as an entrepreneur. If they're trying to buy technology, but you're investing in relationships, that might be a bit of a mismatch. You might want to reconsider. Unless you don't want to sell, which, by the way, perfectly legit. Also, more legit if you don't raise external money. Sidebar, most entrepreneurs never raise external money. Double sidebar, most companies that go public don't raise any external money. Triple sidebar, 2/3 of all companies that go public never had any VCs. So you don't have to be addicted to the idea that somehow you need to come and raise money from equity investors as the way to grow a company. What you do have to do is sell crap at a positive gross margin to customers. That's a requirement. Nothing else is actually required. Oh, this is a hard one for entrepreneurs here too. John, how many times have we had people in the room and we kind of like the business, we're intrigued by it, but the reason we're not going to invest is you. But we don't want to say that because no one wants to have that conversation. So we don't typically say, hey, we love your business, but we think you're a jackass. And no one's going to say that. And so we come up with other reasons to try to soften the blow, right? So sometimes as the entrepreneur, you go, you know, we have all these meetings. They seem warm and interested, but they never go anywhere. After enough of those meetings, you might sit back and go, is it me? It might be you. So we generally don't invest in liars and cheaters and jerks. And we walk with people on a regular basis.
Yeah, one of the interesting conversations, though, is what is a really good entrepreneur? What are the traits you're looking for? Somebody who's nice and you get along with doesn't necessarily mean they're a good CEO.
Totally right.
I think Larry Ellison and
No
people
doubt.
like that.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Yeah, optimizing, so in general, I have a sort of philosophical view, which is optimizing up, I find to be extremely difficult. Flooring things, I find to be much easier. So I can rule out liars and cheaters and jerks pretty confidently. But I don't know what the optimal person is, right? They might be someone I actually don't like to hang out with, but I don't think they're deceitful. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between whether you're trying to solve for the perfection or whether you're just trying to eliminate the major headaches. You know, when we get into a company, we're in them for 7, 8 years. These are long-term relationships. Mostly, I just don't want to hang out with liars and cheaters and jerks, right? Not only do I think they're probably not going to win, it also just isn't any fun. So a lot of investors will walk for that reason instantaneously. We had a rule after a while, which was if the CEO can't sell, we're out. Doesn't matter, nothing else really matters. Because the CEO in these kind of companies has to be able to sell. So that was one of those things where, you know, it's a hard thing to say to the entrepreneur. Hey, we love your business, but we don't think you can sell anything. I mean, that presentation was horrible, and you're not persuasive at all, and we kind of find you just to be boring and drab, right? And so we're out. That's a hard thing to communicate as your reason for not investing. Do you really want to exit? That's an important question. When you own a $10 million revenue company making a couple $1 million at the bottom line and you're making $600,000, $700K a year in income, yeah, guess what? You might decide to not want to sell that business. And how much money do we make on companies we own, John? Zippo! Right? As investors, you only make money when you sell the business. So when the entrepreneur changes their mind, that's a major, major problem for us. That's why we have a lot of control rights on the board about who runs the company and things like this. I mean, you're probably wrong, or you learn. There you go. So, that's that. Questions, thoughts, comments as I switch to another? How are we on time? We're okay.
So we booked it for 2 hours. I think people do want to talk a little bit about the process.
Yeah. Process of
Just the whole angel
stuff.
hope.
My next deck is angel stuff.
Yeah.
But comments, questions as we switch over. Okay, angel stuff. So, angel investing. Angel investing, definition of angel investing. We start with first principles. Angel investors are privately wealthy individuals who are making direct investments into startup companies, or at least young companies. That's it.
With their own money.
With their own money, that's right.
That's different from the.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they don't have a fund, although sometimes you'll see angel investors group their money into a fund and then decide how to do it together, right? There you go. And other times, the angel investors are directing a fund on behalf of people who aren't. That's more like being a VC. So, you know, you have sort of crossing things here. Keep this in mind. They're all doing venture investing. It's just, you know, different parts of the cycle of venture investing. So, the process largely for angel investing, the first money that you get from outside the company is typically not going to be a new relationship. It's going to be a relationship that you have ties to somehow. It might be remote ties, but it's very, very hard to get your first outside money from somebody or some group that you've never, ever, ever met. So, suggestion, go meet them. Spend time with them in advance of asking them for money. Only seems reasonable. They will help you understand what they're looking to invest in, and that's a good thing to do. So if you think this is stuff you want to get into, that's a worthwhile way to get to know people. And most angel investors are happy to have that conversation because remember, they at one point were you, right? They were starting a company and they had no clue what they were doing, and it worked, and they loved it, generally speaking, right? These ones loved it because they made a lot of money off it. That's how they're doing angel investors. That's totally biased sale. So all these guys love